I stood there, in the cold hallway of St. Cecilia's Hospital, when I saw something that would change my life forever. A soft, bluish light began to form above the ICU bed where my daughter had been lying in a deep coma for 4 days. At first, I thought it was just the reflection of the medical equipment, but when that luminous figure took shape, when I saw the blue mantle floating in the air and felt that inexplicable warmth envelop the frigid room, I knew I was witnessing something that medicine could never explain. My name is Carl. I'm 35, and I'm a history teacher at a public school in Oak Haven. I've always been a man of faith, but a kind of dormant faith, the kind you carry in your heart but don't exercise every day. I went to Mass occasionally, prayed before bed when I remembered, but nothing very profound. My life was focused on work, family, and paying the bills. Until everything changed that Thursday in March. It was an ordinary morning. I remember it had rained during the night, and the sidewalks were still wet, with that smell of damp earth that I've always liked. My daughter, Lily, 6 years old, was excited because it was the day of her dance recital at school. She had rehearsed a butterfly-themed choreography for weeks and couldn't stop practicing the moves around the house, twirling and leaping with that boundless energy only children possess. My wife, Sarah, had already left for work at the bank, so it was my turn to take Lily. She looked beautiful in her school uniform and those white ballet shoes she loved so much. On the way, she talked incessantly about how nervous but also thrilled she was. "Daddy, do you think I'll remember all the steps?" she asked, making that face that always melted my heart. The school was only 3 blocks from home. We always walked. It was our special time for conversation. But that day, something felt different. Lily seemed more distracted than usual, looking up at the sky as if searching for something. "What are you looking at, honey?" I asked. She just smiled and said, "Nothing, Daddy. I'm just looking at the clouds that look like angels." At the time, I thought it was sweet, typical of a child. But today, when I recall that phrase, a shiver runs down my spine. We were a block from the school when it happened. Lily ran ahead, as she always did, but this time, I can't explain it properly. It seemed like she didn't see the wet sidewalk, or maybe she tripped over something invisible. I heard the thud before I even processed what had happened. A dull, terrible sound that still echoes in my memory. When I reached her, my daughter was unconscious, bleeding from her head. I screamed for help, picked her up, my hands trembling. A neighbor called the ambulance, but I couldn't wait. I put Lily in my car and sped to the nearest hospital, St. Cecilia's. The drive was a blur of despair. I talked to her the whole time. "Stay with me, my love. Daddy's here. You'll be okay." But she didn't respond. Her silence was deafening. At the hospital, everything happened very quickly. Doctors and nurses rushed in, took Lily inside, and I was left there alone in the hallway, my hands stained with blood and my heart in pieces. I called Sarah, who arrived within minutes, as pale and desperate as I was. Dr. Miller, the neurologist, was a serious man, about 50 years old, with that direct manner doctors have when the situation is grave. He explained that Lily had suffered an intracranial hemorrhage. "We need to operate immediately," he said, "but you need to know that even with surgery, there may be serious consequences." The hours that followed were the longest of my life. Sarah and I took turns between prayers and tears, walking the hallways like ghosts. Father Michael, a family friend who has known us since Lily was born, came to support us. He stayed with us, praying softly, holding our hands when the anguish seemed unbearable. The surgery lasted 5 hours. When Dr. Miller came out of the operating room, his face didn't bring good news. "The operation was successful in controlling the bleeding," he explained, removing his surgical cap. "But Lily is in a coma. We can't predict when or if she will wake up." I felt the ground crumble beneath my feet. Sarah collapsed into my arms, sobbing. Father Michael hugged us and whispered, "God has his plans. Let's have faith." Lily was transferred to the ICU. connected to various machines that blinked and made constant noises. Seeing my daughter in that state, it was as if a part of me had died too. She looked so small in that hospital bed, with tubes and wires all over. Nurse Emily, a veteran nurse with graying hair and a maternal demeanor, became our guardian angel. She cared for Lily with special affection and always found words of comfort for us. "I've seen many miracles in this hospital," she said, adjusting Lily's blanket. The days dragged on. Sarah had to return to work after 3 days. We couldn't afford to lose our jobs at that moment. So I became the one who stayed at the hospital during the day. I sat beside Lily's bed, held her cold little hand, and talked to her about everything. I talked about the classmates who sent drawings, about how the garden at home was blooming, about how Mommy missed her. On Monday of the second week, Dr. Miller gave us news that devastated us. "The tests show that Lily's brain activity is very low," he said, avoiding our eyes. "We need to prepare yourselves emotionally." That night, when we got home, Sarah and I cried until there were no more tears left. We questioned everything: our faith, our plans, the meaning of life. How could God allow such an innocent child to suffer like this? Why our family? But it was around this time that I started to notice something strange. Every night when I arrived at Lily's room in the ICU, there was a different kind of silence. It wasn't just the absence of noise, but a kind of peace that hung in the air. And always, always, I felt as if someone were there with us, an invisible but comforting presence. Father Michael also commented on it. "Carl," he said one of those nights, "do you feel it too? Like we're not alone here?" I confirmed that I did, and he smiled mysteriously. Sometimes, when the situation is most desperate, heaven draws closer to earth. If you're following this story and want to continue receiving real stories like this, which show how the impossible sometimes happens in our lives, subscribe to the channel. Believe me, each story I share can touch your heart in a unique way. The fourth night changed everything. It was a Tuesday, and the hospital was quieter than usual. Sarah had gone home to rest, and I was alone with Lily. Around 2 in the morning, I was almost asleep in the chair when I sensed a shift in the atmosphere. It was as if the temperature had risen a few degrees, but not uncomfortably. It was a warm heat, like a mother's hug. I opened my eyes and noticed the hallway lights were softer. The machines that always made that constant beeping seemed to have changed their rhythm, creating a kind of low, harmonious melody. I got up from the chair, confused, trying to understand what was happening. That's when I saw it. At first, it was just a subtle glow over Lily's bed, like a reflection of light on the wall. But the glow began to grow, to take shape. I blinked several times, thinking I was hallucinating from exhaustion, but the vision remained, becoming clearer and clearer. A feminine figure began to form. It was translucent at first, but gradually gained definition. She wore a blue robe that seemed to float without wind, and her hair was long and brown, framing a face of serenity I will never forget. Her hands were extended over Lily, not touching, but radiating that soft, golden light. My first impulse was to run, to call someone, to scream, but I couldn't move. It wasn't fear, it was reverence. A deep peace washed over me, as if all my anxieties and pains had been suspended for a moment. The figure, and I knew in my heart who she was, even without ever having such an experience, leaned slightly over Lily. I didn't hear words, but I felt a communication happening. It was as if she were talking to my daughter in a language that transcended the physical senses. The room was filled with soft music, like a distant choir singing a melody I had never heard before, but that seemed familiar to my heart. Tears began to stream down my face without me realizing it. They weren't tears of sadness, but of an emotion so profound that I have no words to describe it. Then something happened that changed everything. The figure extended one hand toward Lily's face, And at that moment, the monitors that had been emitting that monotonous beep for days began to change. The waves on the EEG screen, which had been almost flat, began to show spikes of activity. Lily sighed. It was a low sigh, almost imperceptible, but I heard it. After almost 2 weeks of silence, my daughter had made a sound. The vision began to fade slowly, but before it disappeared completely, the figure looked directly at me. Her eyes held infinite compassion, and in that gaze I felt a clear message. Everything will be all right. Trust. When the light disappeared completely, I ran to Lily's bed. Her little eyes were moving under her closed eyelids, and her breathing, which had been entirely artificial, now had its own rhythm. "Lily," I whispered, holding her hand. "Daddy's here, my love." And then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, she opened her eyes. Not all at once, but slowly, blinking several times until she focused on me. When our eyes met, she tried to smile, even with the tube in her throat. I ran down the hallways shouting for Nurse Emily, for Dr. Miller, for anyone. She woke up. Lily woke up. It seemed like I had gone mad, but I didn't care. Dr. Miller arrived in minutes, still in his pajamas. He was on call and sleeping in a room next door. When he saw Lily conscious, his eyes widened in surprise. He began to perform all the basic neurological tests, and to each command he gave, Lily responded perfectly. "This is impossible," the doctor murmured, watching the monitors. "Last night's tests showed minimal brain activity. How can she be reacting like this?" Nurse Emily arrived shortly afterward, and when she saw Lily awake, she crossed herself 3 times in a row. "Thank God," she said, tears in her eyes. "It's a miracle." I called Sarah, who arrived in 20 minutes, still in her nightgown and slippers. When she saw our daughter conscious, she collapsed in tears of relief and gratitude. Lily tried to speak, but the tube in her throat prevented her. Dr. Miller said it was best to remove the assisted breathing equipment, as she was breathing normally on her own. When we finally heard Lily's voice, the first thing she said was, "Hi, Daddy. Hi, Mommy." The beautiful lady said everything would be okay. Sarah and I looked at each other. "What beautiful lady, sweetheart?" I asked, my heart racing. "The lady in the blue dress who was here. She told me I could come back, that you missed me a lot." Lily spoke with the naturalness of a child describing a new toy. Father Michael arrived at the hospital as soon as he heard the news. When I told him about the vision, he simply smiled and said, "Carl, you've been blessed with a very special grace. Not everyone has the privilege of witnessing divine intervention so clearly." The next few days were filled with pure joy and gratitude. Dr. Miller ran a complete battery of tests, and all showed that Lily was completely recovered. There were no signs of neurological sequelae, her motor coordination was perfect, and her memory intact. "In 30 years of medicine, I've never seen a recovery like this," he admitted to me and Sarah. "The tests show neuronal regeneration that scientifically would be impossible in this time frame." Lily remained hospitalized for 3 more days for observation, and during that time, something magical happened. She began to draw. Nurse Emily had brought paper and colored pencils, and my daughter spent hours drawing the same image. A woman in a blue dress, with a glow around her, extending her hands over a hospital bed. The drawings were impressive for a 6-year-old. There were details I couldn't even reproduce. The folds of the robe, the serene expression on her face, even the arrangement of the medical equipment in the room. When other patients and family members saw the drawings, they began to approach, curious. Lily told her story with the simplicity of a child, but her words deeply touched those who listened. Soon, small prayer circles formed in the hospital, with people asking for intercession for their own loved ones. Dr. Miller, initially skeptical, began to question his own convictions. In a private conversation with me, he confessed, Carl, I'm a man of science. I've always believed that everything have a logical explanation. But what I've witnessed here makes me rethink many things. When we finally took Lily home, our lives had completely changed. Not only because of the joy. Every Saturday, we meet with families going through difficult times, especially those with sick children. We don't preach miracles. We know they are rare and special. But we offer something equally powerful: hope, faith, and the certainty that we are not alone in our struggles. Lily, now 7 years old, continues to draw. Her drawings have evolved, but they always retain elements of light and hope. She talks about that day naturally, as if conversing with celestial beings were the most common thing in the world. Sometimes, when she's concentrating on drawing, I see her stop and look at nothing, smiling. When I ask what she's seeing, she simply says, "Nothing, Daddy, just nice people taking care of us." Dr. Miller became a family friend. He remains an exceptional doctor, but now admits that there are mysteries in life that science cannot yet explain. The important thing, he says, is that Lily is well. How it happened is secondary. Father Michael always reminds us that miracles happen every day, but we don't always recognize them. Sometimes, he says, we're so focused on the problems that we miss the signs of hope that God constantly sends us. Today, looking back, I realized that that experience wasn't just about Lily's healing. It was about awakening in us a greater awareness of the sacred that permeates our lives. It was about understanding that there are forces in the universe that go beyond our comprehension, but that act with love and compassion. I still work as a teacher, but now my perspective on life is completely different. I see each day as a gift, each moment with my family as a blessing. And when my students are going through difficulties, I share with them the certainty that there is always hope, even in the darkest moments. The experience also taught me about the importance of community. During those difficult days in the hospital, it wasn't just the doctors and nurses who sustained us. It was the love of friends like Father Michael, the dedication of Nurse Emily, the support of neighbors and strangers who prayed for our family. Sarah always says that those were the worst and the best days of our lives. The worst, obviously, because of the anguish of almost losing our daughter, but also the best because it was when we experienced so clearly the presence of the divine in our lives. Lily is growing up as a normal child, playful and clever. She's doing well in school, has friends, argues with me when she doesn't want to take a bath. In short, she's a child like any other. But there are moments when I see in her eyes a wisdom that goes beyond her age, as if she were keeping memories of a place she briefly knew and where she knows she will one day return. Sometimes people ask me if I really believe I saw the Virgin Mary that night. My answer is always the same. It doesn't matter if it was a vision, a hallucination caused by fatigue, or a real manifestation of the divine. What matters is that at that moment when I needed hope most, it appeared. And in the wake of that experience, my daughter was healed, my family was strengthened, and my faith was transformed. Today, 3 years later, I still go to St. Cecilia's Hospital from time to time, not as a desperate father, but as a volunteer. I talk to other families who are going through what we went through, offer a word of comfort, share the hope I received. I always carry one of Lily's drawings with me, the ones she did in the hospital, showing the blue figure extending its hands over a bed. When I show it to others, I see in their eyes the same thing I felt that night, a spark of hope igniting in the darkness. If there's anything I've learned from all this, it's that miracles exist, but not always in the way we expect. Sometimes the miracle isn't physical healing, but the peace we find in the midst of the storm. Sometimes it's not the solution to our problems, but the strength to face them. And sometimes, as in our case, it's an intervention so clear and powerful that it transforms not just one life, but everyone around us. Today, when I put Lily to bed and she asks me to tell a story, I ask her which one she wants to hear. Often, she asks me to tell her about that day in the hospital when the nice lady came to visit. And I tell it, always with the same emotion as the first time, because I know it wasn't just a story. It was the day heaven touched earth, and our lives were never the same. If you've made it this far in this account, know that it wasn't by chance. Maybe you're going through a difficult time. Maybe you've lost hope. Or maybe you just need a reminder that there are greater forces working in our favor, even when we can't see them. My message to you is simple. Don't give up. In the darkest moments, when it seems there's no way out, remember that light can appear in the most unexpected ways. And if you can't see it on your own, seek out your community, your faith, your loved ones. Because, as I learned during those days in the hospital, no one needs to face life's storms alone. Life goes on, with its ups and downs, its joys and challenges. But now we walk with the certainty that we are loved, protected, and that there's a greater purpose in everything we experience. And that, to me, is the true miracle.